Okay, welcome everybody. Just before we get started, we want to acknowledge that we're coming to you from the traditional territories of the Iqaluit and Syilx, and also want to just acknowledge the Métis community and their contributions. And we're here tonight for our first Career Spotlight of 2022, and excited to have Jennifer Dustin with us.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Yeah, thanks for asking. I'm always, jump at the opportunity to talk about social work, and it's something that I care quite a lot about, and that I've had kind of a diverse background of practice experiences. So I'm happy to talk more about it.
Yeah, so just to give a little bit of background on Jennifer Dustin, she's actually a faculty member at NVIT in the Indigenous Human Services and Bachelor of Social Work program. She comes to us very well educated with a Bachelor of Arts degree, a Bachelor of Social Works degree, a Master of Social Work degree, and she's currently working on her PhD with McMaster University. She not only has experience teaching in the post-secondary education system, but she also works as in a private practice as a mental health clinician, providing one-on-one counseling to individuals in need. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Just wondering, to start us off, if you can tell us a little about your profession and the current position you hold.
Sure. Yeah. So my profession is social work. So that's my educational background and my practice background as well. So I am a registered social worker. In many cases, in terms of your work as a social worker in BC, being registered has its benefits, and that's sort of different across the country. So I also have some experience working as a social worker in Ontario, where registration is mandatory there. So some difference in terms of registration backgrounds, across the country. But yeah, so registered social worker, and the roles I play currently are that I am a faculty member at NVIT. So I teach in the post-secondary institute here in Merritt, both in the Indigenous Human Service programs and the social work program. So in our BSW, the bachelor program, as well as a diploma level. And I also have a private practice that I work, a couple afternoons a week doing that. So doing more clinical work.
Great, thank you. Just wondering if you can give the layperson an idea of the kind of duties and responsibilities that come along with being a social worker.
Sure. I mean, I think most commonly when people think about social work, they often think immediately of child protection. So that's really a primary role that social work plays in Canada, is child protection. So that looks like prevention work with families where there might be some tension or some difficulties there. And then it moves all the way to apprehension. So when it's not safe for children to be in particular settings, then social work would be sort of heading up the process for finding a more sort of appropriate space for a child to be. Really, really difficult work, but really deeply important work as well. So a big part of social work education is looking at sort of what's happening on the family level and on the individual level, but also what's happening on structural levels as well that might be contributing to some of the hardships that people experience, like poverty, like racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, these types of things. So social work, we've got a big lens, and when we think about child protection, we use that full lens to look at child protection as well. So another thing we do would be, we work quite heavily in the mental health field. So you might work in a hospital. I myself have worked in public education. So I've worked in elementary and high schools in Ontario as a school social worker there. We work in mental health in nonprofit agencies as well as government funded agencies. So generally, when there's a mental health focus to some sort of programming or agency, social work isn't too far behind. So that's a pretty common area as well. Social work and social workers will be involved in things like housing initiatives, so helping people find appropriate and safe housing. This is a growing need that we have, certainly in Merritt, but I would say across the country as well. Where else do we find social workers? Kind of everywhere. It's a pretty flexible justice system. Yeah, excellent. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're kind of all over. One of the sort of things that I tend to talk often about, in the classroom or with, people who ask about what I do, is that social work is super broad, which has all kinds of beautiful benefits in terms of work, because it means that we can kind of be wherever we need to be, or, when we respond to community need in really flexible ways. But one of the downsides is that sometimes it feels kind of too big. It feels a bit overwhelming. It feels a bit like, whoa, where am I going to go? So yes, that is something to consider when you go into social work, is just keeping in mind sort of needing to be flexible in terms of your approach, where you might land, what population you might work with. Often there's a lot of overlap, but yeah, exciting nonetheless.
But yeah, like you said, really broad. So you could start out in one wing of social work and end up in a completely different one. So there's room to grow your career from social work degree.
Yeah, my first job was I worked my first social work position. I worked with Merit Youth and Families here in town. So I graduated with my BSW in Kamloops at TRU, and I immediately came back to Merit to do some family support work. So worked alongside a child protection social worker to do some of that work, and then it sort of grew from there. I sort of have taken a number of different steps from that, but that was my first sort of entry point into the field.
Great, thank you.
Now, yeah, this is probably going to be another big question here. Can you take us through a little bit what your workplace or work environment might look like, knowing that there's probably quite a few different ones? Office, traveling, during the day. What does that look like for a typical social worker?
So it really it's really very dependent on where you are working. So right now in the position that I have at NVIT, as an instructor, a post-secondary instructor, which as a social worker, I still consider social work practice. So the academic work, but in the social work field still. So we have, again, that overlap. I'm pretty, like, I stick in one spot. Like, I'm in the office, I'm in the classroom. That's sort of what that looks like. At NVIT, I also have the opportunity to teach in community. So we have a number of Indigenous human service programs running in more rural, northern Indigenous focused communities as well. So that's been one of the real perks of working at NVIT, in addition to many, but it is something I really love, getting to travel around and meet new people and see things, from different perspectives. So a bit of travel involved there. It's not unusual for instructors to do different conference related work. So you're kind of, if you're involved in research, you might sort of do some travel for that as well. From my clinician hat that I wear, from that role, it's also pretty, I sort of stay in my office, especially now during COVID, where all the counseling work is done online or over the phone. However, I have, it's not unusual for some clinicians to have a couple offices. So they might have their primary office and then do satellite work. Or if they have an arrangement where they actually visit people in their homes to do counseling or supportive work in that way, they might do home visits. That's a really common experience for social workers, to do site visits or home visits. So, there can be some sort of commuting during the day in your vehicle or in a work vehicle, depending on your agency. And when I worked at the school district, certainly we were sort of bombing around between schools. So really it's dependent on the needs of the agency. And coming to mind right now is, if you worked at Ask Wellness, for example, here in Merritt, and you were doing outreach, most of your day could be outside, walking around, checking in with people, sort of assessing the need and responding to needs in that way. So it really varies. It can be, kind of really computer-based and office-based, but the flexibility, of course, can be really broad too, in terms of travel and moving about.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. And then I guess just maybe even building on that, what would a typical day look like, or maybe a work week look like for a social worker?
Sure. Yeah. So in my clinical role, it's pretty heavily scheduled. So I have a sense of which clients are coming in when, and so to prepare for a client, I might review notes that I have from earlier sessions. I might reflect on what it is that client is working through, and sort of start to build a bit of a game plan or start to build a bit of a case conceptualization so that I can help support the client in a meaningful way for them. And then, then you have your session, an hour, 2 hours. I try to run really flexible, especially when I'm working with clients who've experienced complex trauma. I try to leave quite a bit of space. So for example, I have one client who I see sometimes at 3 hours at a time. And I, as a private clinician, I'm able to provide that level of flexibility that she may need. It can be pretty heavy work. So I try not to, I usually try to have maybe 5 clinical hours in my sort of private practice day. And that seems to be enough for me. It gives me enough time to do the paperwork I need to do, but also, kind of come down after some of those sessions too. In my teaching practice or in my teaching role, classes are scheduled. So I think usually I have 1 or 2 classes a day. So 3 to 6 hours in the classroom scheduled. Online, that looks a little bit different. But when I'm not in the classroom, then I'm, prepping for classes. So getting the slides ready, making sure I'm familiar with the material, trying to update materials, doing new research, that kind of stuff. And then also marking. So the 2 roles that I have currently, those are sort of what my days look like.
I'm sure you can relate to that. Hey, Dave.
Yeah.
I shuddered a little bit.
Yeah.
So just to build on that, what do you like the most about your work, and what do you find the most challenging or difficult part of being a social worker?
I think the thing I love most about social work is its flexibility. While it can produce a tremendous amount of, sometimes really kind of confusion or uncertainty, especially when we are faced with all of the complex problems we have that either, individuals face or families or communities, it's almost never the case that there's one really clear solution. So I really appreciate the flexibility that I'm given as a professional to work with the client, whether that's an individual, a family, a community, a classroom, to sort of figure out ways to solve that problem together. So I never feel like I'm held responsible for solving whatever issue is in front of me, but I certainly feel responsible for facilitating the process to come to some sort of next step. So yeah, I quite like that opportunity to get to problem solve directly with people. So that's been really wonderful. It's also quite a privilege to be able to be permitted to connect with people and to, really experience and sort of view the world from other people's perspectives as well. It's quite a vulnerable position that many people are in when they come to talk to social workers and are prepared to seek, support for whatever reason. It's not unusual for somebody to be seeing a social worker on some of their worst days. So holding space and really honoring that as best I'm able, I think is something that always feels a bit daunting and a bit, a bit uneasy at times, but tends always to be that kind of kernel of really beautiful relationship development that I get to have with clients and communities. So that's sort of the favorite bit. Oh, the bit that feels most difficult. I mean, the issues are very complex. So sometimes there are no clear answers. And sometimes you can really work very hard to try to come to some sort of solution or some sort of, change. And it doesn't work out for a number of reasons, right? Sometimes, things just aren't, sometimes we get a bit ahead of ourselves and maybe we created a plan that didn't make sense in the way we had hoped. But sometimes you're disappointed in the work. You get kind of let down sometimes, and that can be hard because you're dealing with real people who are trying to manage really complex issues, and that can be hard to swallow sometimes.
Yes, yeah, I can imagine. Can you tell us about some of the most memorable experiences during your career?
Yeah, yes. I think, so a couple things come up, but right off the top of my head, I think back to some of my work as a school social worker in Ontario. So in Ontario, every school is connected to a school social worker. It looks a little bit different in BC. But part of the role that the school social worker has, and I was in Hamilton, Ontario, is that we sort of supervise attendance. So when students aren't in class or they're not showing up regularly, and we can't figure out what's happening, the sort of next layer would be to connect with the school social worker to reach out. Part of the reason being is that most of the time when students aren't attending regularly, there may be something else going on. So parental mental health issues, perhaps, maybe some sort of challenge that the family is trying to deal with together. And social work can be really helpful in resolving some of those issues. So I think one of the most pivotal moments for me is just those moments where you're working with youth, you're working with students who are really, really struggling. And when you get to see even a little bit of change, a little bit of positive sort of improvement, a little bit of greater engagement, either with the school itself or with another kind of supportive program, that feels really, really great. And I have one student in mind who had a real rough go. And after some, hard work and some, real, trust development, we were able to make some nice gains. So yeah, I think that's, it's a good reminder. And certainly in social work, we don't always get the experience of seeing the benefits of our work. We can't always know what comes of the seeds that we are planting in our work. So in this case, I was able to see some of the fruit bearing from that plant. So that was, really wonderful, I think.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Awesome. So what pathway, I mean, we heard Jennifer speak to a lot of your credentials. And can you tell us just maybe a bit more about that path you took to get to your current position, education, work experience, and, was this the plan right from high school even?
I did have, the counselor at high school at the time, he also coached the basketball team, and I'm not especially great at basketball, but I am especially great at managing, it seemed. So I would go and take all the stats. And so I had quite a lot of bench time sitting next to the school counselor who, we sort of figure problems out together. And he told me probably in grade 10 or 11, he said, Jen, if you can solve, the complex issues that are happening with all these girls on this basketball team, maybe you should think about counseling. And I at that point thought maybe school counseling, sort of filling the role that he was doing as well. And so in my mind, I had imagined taking an education route. Taking teachers education, that sort of stuff, and had applied after. So I'd taken my English degree first, trying to figure out what it is I wanted to do. And when I tried to apply for work after my English degree, I realized there wasn't a lot of work that I wanted to do that an English, like a Bachelor of Arts with a major in English, was qualified to do. But what it really beautifully set me up for was to be able to move on in school with, I shouldn't say ease, but writing a paper by the time I hit my Bachelor of Social Work after having done an English degree, probably took me half the time that it took, some of my other classmates. And that is not a reflection of my intelligence. That is a reflection of having practiced it for 5 years before that. So, I did my English degree first. And after finishing the English degree, I started to look at what jobs I liked and where I thought I might turn towards the education and teaching direction. It turns out that all the jobs I sort of liked the look of required a social work degree. So I ended up taking that direction. So it was, I think, the job postings were the things that shaped my thinking. So I went back to TRU and did my Bachelor of Social Work and worked in the field for 5 or 7 years before I went off to do my master's again, but move on with education. Yeah.
So if someone is planning to pursue a career in social work, are there other career options that they could take, say with a Bachelor of Social Work, that might kind of branch off of the direct social work like you've referenced earlier?
Okay, so sort of thinking about social work positions that aren't like child protection, working in a hospital, like that sort of thing. What else there might be? One of the things I was especially interested in with social work was in the nonprofit sector. So there's so much of the nonprofit sector that provides services for communities that social work is beautifully positioned to do. And one of those things, for me anyway, the thing I felt especially, sort of passionate about was mentorship. So Big Brothers, Big Sisters. And I had volunteered as a Big Sister while I was doing some of my undergrad work in Kamloops. And by the time I got to my Bachelor of Social Work, that's really what I wanted to do. I had this vision of possibly starting up a mentoring program in Merritt, and that's something I wanted to be looking into. So volunteer coordination is one of those roles that, it's sort of, I know that some people feel a bit uneasy about how acute or how extreme some of the sort of crisis work can be in social work. And that is true. Some of our work really is crisis oriented, but then you have other spaces like volunteer coordination, like event planning, like, some have used it towards like social work and then decided actually they want to go into HR, like human resources. Or, I actually have a couple social work friends who started out in the social work field and then went on to do more like child development work. So, kind of, I think master's and more graduate level work in terms of early childhood education and curriculum development and that type of thing. So you learn a lot about people, you learn a lot about communities, society, social and structural issues and inequality. And it gives you a really nice sense of how all those things hang together. So I think social workers are pretty useful in any setting, but we also like to shake it up and we'll kind of point out things that aren't working really great. So we can kind of be the disturbers too. So I think we're helpful, but we don't always make it easy.
Yeah, I can see that. Can you tell us what the future looks like for social workers? Do you think there'll be a high demand for people with your education, skills, and experience? And do you think that technological advances or societal changes will impact your line of work?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So in the human services and at NVIT, we have it set up where the first two, so you can do your human service diploma in 2 years at NVIT, which we've kind of created as the first sort of step towards a Bachelor of Social Work. And we have some overlapping courses to sort of incentivize students to continue on with the BSW. And our students who have taken the human services are very sought after in the community because we've really worked hard to prepare them well for availabilities in the community. So yes, work is very much, students with human service diplomas, students with Bachelor of Social Work degrees are very, very sought after and headhunted a bit in town from one agency to another. The skills are really unique and really flexible and really responsive and very powerful when they're needed. So yes, we need them. So please go into social work. In terms of technological advances, I can speak to my own experience of sort of having to shift to an online format, both in the teaching sort of field and in the clinical field. So moving that sort of mental health support from a face-to-face encounter to, a Zoom arrangement, kind of like we're doing here. And many, community programs have shifted to an online format as well. So that has been a bit of a change, but many programs continue as best they can in that scenario. So having the ability to flex, I think will be helpful. It certainly hasn't reduced the need for social work in any capacity. In fact, I think it's increased it. And again, we're kind of faced with the challenge of adapting to that. And then there are all kinds of fields that are growing. So working with seniors and elders, for example, is a field that is growing a lot. And I'm always encouraging students as I'm placing them for their practicum placements, I'm encouraging them to consider learning in a setting where they will have interaction with seniors and elder care. This really is something that is growing. So if people are interested in job security and in a really, creative and engaging field. Certainly social work with the aging community is something I'd be looking into for sure.
Yeah, sounds good. Can you tell us what personal attributes, skills, and interests would be a good fit for someone planning to pursue a career in your field?
Yeah, I think flexibility, compassion, a willingness to communicate across difference. Easy enough to say, but often pretty challenging to do, right? We do a lot of assuming every day that we know where other people are coming from, or we know how other people understand issues or the world. And social work really calls you to be questioning those things all of the time. So communication skills are vitally important in the social work field. Yeah, things to be doing. Definitely volunteer work is really needed. I think coming with some sense of curiosity and an openness to be flexible in the field. All the time, like I mentioned, I get, students who have a pretty good sense of the work they want to do or the, community they want to work with, maybe based on past experience, right? There will be students who want to work with, in the addictions field, perhaps based on some of their own experience or having supported someone through their struggle with addiction. And so they think they want to do that work, but then they do a placement in, in a different field altogether, and they got all excited about that. So really just sort of having an open mind, being willing to, to have your perspective shifted a bit and to communicate through all of it. I think those are pretty important
Yeah, so
skills.
good interpersonal skills, actual genuine care to sort of get to know and understand where people are coming from, I think.
Yes, yeah.
Sorry, yeah, of course. If you have a student that's maybe thinking about social work but isn't quite sure, is there something that you would recommend that they can do to explore this line of work in a bit more detail to help them make that decision?
Yeah, I do think volunteering is useful. I think getting to know some of the agencies in your community and being involved where you can, I think that's pretty helpful. It does, two things. It lets you know what's available in terms of possible work experience later on in life and making those sort of networking and communicating contacts early on, which is nice. But it also helps you to start to understand what others are going through, what other members of the community are sort of experiencing, and how hard it is sometimes to ask for help. So getting a sense of both ends of that, I think, is especially helpful. So definitely volunteer work. I think there's quite a lot of blogs and like Instagram accounts and Facebook account, like all these things that can be a bit tongue in cheek about some of the hard work that social work does. And also there's some really helpful, informative spaces to be finding out more about social work, like the BC Association of Social Workers and the Canadian Association of Social Workers. And I think specifically the Canadian Association of Social Workers has a whole list of webinars, some of which are a bit advanced. So if you're just learning, it might not, they might be a bit more than you need, but there's lots of introductory material there too. And most of those webinars are available to students. So you can just sort of register and click the sort of student section, and you'll be able to sort of watch some of the content in that way. So those are, I think that's a pretty helpful and free resource to be accessing as well.
Awesome. Yeah, we have some students that are interested in social that are looking for ways to learn more and are incentivized because they have to do 30 hours of career exploration.
Right. There you go.
Part of their CLC course. So that's a great suggestion and one I'll definitely be recommending for them.
Good.
How about just some general advice for young people as they consider their possible career choices?
Yeah, I think, I know I sound like a bit of a broken record, but keeping that sort of open mind, I think, is really useful. We know that things change really quickly. I think COVID has been, a really harsh reminder for us about that, having to stay kind of flexible. I think that is useful for the social work field generally. but also it's useful as you sort of move through your academic career. So whatever it is you're moving on to, whether that's sort of a trades program, more of a professional degree like social work, or if you're moving further into an academic process, looking to just do more of that academic research, being able to maintain some of that flexibility and that sort of resilience to, bumps in the road, I think is great. So the more sort of comfortable you can be with being a little uncomfortable, the better. So yeah, I think trying to maintain that sort of perspective is useful. I think, building up your community of care now is useful. So, knowing who, just the sort of mentors that you have in your life now, whether those are family members, friends, professionals in the community, counselors, teachers, people that you trust and aspire to sort of work toward, maintain those connections, because they can be really helpful. And I've written a lot of reference letters in the past, so I hope they're helpful too. But yeah, I think kind of building your community of care is helpful, and moving beyond some of that comfort space to explore some, new opportunities too.
Just wondering if I may, Dave, just go off script and ask one additional question.
Of course.
Because Jennifer's such an expert on the IHMS program and also on the social work program at NVIT. Just wondering if you can go over the ins and outs of the differences. Like in social work at NVIT, you don't actually apply to social work until you're going into third year.
That's
so
right.
There's a couple of different options that you can take. If you're thinking about going to NVIT, you can apply to an Associate of Arts program and do your first 2 years that way. Or alternatively, you can apply to the Indigenous Human Services program and work towards your certificate and then your diploma, and then apply to social work. And I'm wondering if you can talk about what the differences are in those two routes.
Yeah, so the Indigenous Human Service program, we kind of rebooted, I guess, just about 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago, something like that. It's really geared towards providing that foundation for students interested in working in the human services. So, nonprofit agencies in the community, when you are looking to work in and support those who are navigating social issues, human service, people with human service degree or diplomas rather, tend to be the people at the front line doing that work. And then move on to social work, where there's a little bit, a higher level of responsibility, maybe an increased level of complexity of the issues, or an increased level of acuteness of the problems, or the issues rather. So we sort of tailor-made the Indigenous Human Service program to kind of match up with the Bachelor of Social Work. So what we are finding is students who have taken the IHMS program, or the Indigenous Human Service Worker program, they are already familiar with lots of the language, familiar with lots of the social issues, lots of the different sort of theories that root social work. So by the time they get to that third year, they're kind of already in the zone. They're already there. They're kind of, ready for it. Now, students who choose not to take the Indigenous Human Service program, either, they weren't aware of it, they weren't quite sure what they wanted to do, maybe they had taken education elsewhere, what have you. Students who have a different sort of background, they come into the social work program, maybe not having the same foundations in, like I mentioned, the sort of academic work, the theory, having a sense of really what social work practice looks like, but they bring in a different kind of experience. So they may be bringing in more of like a criminology lens, more of a, an English base or literature lens, which adds more of kind of an arts element to social work, which is really helpful too. And I find that in our discussions in class, having students with different backgrounds really helps to diversify the conversation, really helps us look at things a little bit differently. So, of course, I'm going to be cheering on the IHMS program. That's where I work. But students who come from different backgrounds, it might feel a bit, there might be a bit of tension or feel like a bit of a challenge in that first, couple weeks, maybe even a month and a bit, but then they're hitting the ground running, and, we can be pretty supportive and help people along. So Maybe a bit of growing pains the other route, but certainly helpful and useful for the classroom too, to be able to hear different perspectives. So
yeah, so just really, there's not really one right route. There's just different ways of going about it. If you're certain that, yes, this is the field for you, then I think maybe the Indigenous Human Services might be the better route. If you're still just sort of thinking about it, you're not sure, then maybe you should start out with an Associate of Arts program, just so that you can sort of feel it out and see if it's the right route for you. And like you said, you would still be able to apply to the social work program in third year. The only other thing I might add is, I know you mentioned all this stuff about the theoretical background that you get from the IHMS program, but also I would venture to say that you probably are getting some experience too, because you get to do practicum placements. So you actually get to try out a little bit of what it would be like to be working in the human services field. So that's another carrot that might be something that really entices certain people to go that route.
Absolutely. And it prepares you for specific work in the sort of nonprofit work, the sort of the social services or human services. So in merit, that would include work like Ask Wellness, like the shelter, like Endeavor to Be Better. You might even do some introductory work or frontline work with places like Work BC. So really, anywhere that you are interacting with the community and you are sort of charged with referrals or problem solving, those types of things, human services can be a real strength. And we are seeing more and more that that our community is asking for students who have that experience. So we've gotten great reviews. So come on over.
Yeah, and I'll just comment too. I love that it connects so well to employment, and that that you can do those 2 years and start to work, and then come back later, right?
Yes.
That idea of career hiring I think is really cool and for students.
Yeah, and students often make the networking and sort of arrange summer work out of their placements as well. I always remind students that in placement, you're meant to learn. We're not meant to be thinking about employment, but they turn out to be learning the skills so quickly, and staff is so pleased that, and they're offered positions occasionally. It's not unusual, in a number of the community agencies around. So, Upper Nicola Band, Lower Nicola Band, and Catmac Health, these places are all looking for qualified, dedicated, and talented youth to come work with them. So come on in, we're ready.
Okay, well, Jen, we just, I think, want to open up for questions now, if you're okay to answer.
Of course.
Our group here, I know we don't have a huge group tonight, but either Preeta or Tirsa, if you have any questions, feel free to jump on there and ask, or throw it in the chat.
Hi there. Thanks for presenting today.
Thanks.
Yeah, it was really interesting hearing about your journey as a social worker, and just, like how you decided to do what you wanted to do, especially considering that you got a bachelor's degree in English. I think that's too much school for me, but good for you.
It was a bit of a circuitous route. Yeah, a little bit longer than it needed to be, but useful in the long run.
Yeah. So I'm a third year student actually in the BSW program. And I was just wondering, like, we write a lot of papers explaining, what kind of practice do you want in the future? How are you going to incorporate certain theories in your practice? So I was just wondering, like, outside of school and practicum, like, how do you feel like your approach to practice has developed? And do you actually see yourself using like certain aspects of theories in practice?
Yeah, I do. I do. I didn't, if you were to have asked me that question in the BSW program, I would say there's no way that I do. There's no way I will. I won't be using these theories. And then I do. It turns out I do. I think my theoretical approach to social work, my sort of foundations, started in the Bachelor of Arts program, which is interesting. So in literature, you sort of learn literature related theories. So postmodernism was something that mattered very much to me. So a real kind of flexible approach to writing, a flexible approach to social work. I continue to, with that today. And then it grew towards a more narrative approach to counseling and therapy, which is what I do in my private practice. But yeah, that's kind of, I'm surprised. I was surprised and am today that it's really rooted even in my early post-secondary education, but it is something that I continue to use, that postmodern approach to social work. And it means that it can be I can be a bit of a challenge to some of my colleagues who really see things in, ticky boxy, or like they have a more linear approach. Great
Like a
and
more
useful and
conventional
productive.
method.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And I sort of approach things with a little bit more, uncertainty perhaps. But
Okay.
yeah.
All right, cool. Thank you.
Thanks.
I have a question also.
Great.
For like the justice system, does that mean like counselors in, what is it called? Like that help criminals and stuff like that? Like in the court of law or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so for example, in Merritt, we have the Indigenous Justice Center. So I know there are social workers who do work directly with clients who are navigating the justice system. So trying to figure out, when's the court date? What does that look like? What's the process? Are there things that clients need in order to get, to sort of make sure that they're accessing the system in a fair way? We have social workers who are doing providing mental health supports in prisons for those who are incarcerated. We have, social workers who do preventative work with, children and youth who are at risk of engaging in criminal behavior. Yeah, we're kind of all over the place in that sector. Yeah, so lots of flexibility there as well. I think it depends on how you want to be working, and then you would sort of look at what kind of program you'd be interested in.
Okay, that makes sense.
Good.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. Go ahead.
That's okay.
Sorry, I just had one more quick question.
Of course.
When you first started as a social worker, like outside of practicum, and there was a difficult situation that you had to navigate within policy or legislation, how did you overcome that?
This is actually, I'm laughing because this is one of the reasons I chose to move on to my master's program. So one of the sort of challenges that I had related to policy specific to the agency I was working in was an interpretation issue. So I was interpreting policy in one way. The executive director saw it in a different way. And as you've probably already heard, I have a hard time when somebody says there's only one way to approach this thing. So I was very interested in thinking about work with families, work with youth from a relational perspective. So how do I put my relationship with the client first, or with the student first, before thinking about program cost? And it was her responsibility to think about program cost and administration, but it was my responsibility to think about the client and what they needed. So the policy caused us to butt heads a bit, and it also caused me to really question whether or not I was in the right field, whether social work was a right fit for me. I was really challenged to think, if she is a social worker and she can imagine my work in this way that didn't make any sense to me at the time, and I am a social worker and I can see it in this way, how can these be the same things? Which felt really destabilizing. So I figured either I would leave social work. I quit that job because I couldn't work with this person anymore, but I figured I would either leave social work or I should dive in. And that's when, with some guidance of a instructor that I had at TRU, who was a teacher that I had in one of the programs or one of the classes, he told me that I would really love McMaster. So without looking into Hamilton or looking into the university, I just applied. And thankfully got in, and it helped me put language around the tension that I was experiencing. So what I learned is that social work is both. It's really can be really strict. We have legislation and policy that needs to be followed to the T. And there's lots of social work that needs to be gray and flexible, because that, so many of the problems that our clients face need that kind of responsive reaction. So it caused me to chill out a bit.
Okay, good to know. So I can expect that then when I start 4th year practicum, probably.
Yeah, I think that's part of the beauty of social work. I think we need to be disagreeing and negotiating and exploring these things, right? Because it matters so much. So we can never say that there's one approach that works for everyone.
Right.
And we need to be kind of poking at each other a bit.
Yeah, creating good trouble.
That's right. Good trouble. That's great.
Thank you.
No problem. Thank you.
I like that saying. I'm going to use that down the road.
Yeah.
Yeah, very. Yeah, unless if there's any more questions that come to mind, otherwise we'll let Jen get on with her evening. And just wanted to say from the school district side of things, thanks so much for joining us and kind of shedding some light on social work. And I know that we have some students that are interested that will really benefit from listening in on tonight's interview. So thank you so much.
Great.
Yeah,
And
thanks,
feel
Jennifer.
free. Oh, thank you. Yeah, and you're welcome to sort of pass on my email address too if students have questions and they want to connect with me directly. They're welcome to do that. So I'm around.
We're up at NVIT, some of our students, so maybe I'll encourage them to stop by and say hello.
That's great. Yeah, absolutely.
Yep, I can connect them with you for sure. So if
Perfect.
any students are watching this, even the recording, just come by my office, M003 in the Learning Commons, and I can connect you with Jennifer Dustin.
That's great.
Perfect. Okay,
Cool.
Yeah, thanks so much, and have a good night, everyone.
Sounds good.
Thank
Thanks
you.
so much.
Good night,
See you
everybody.
later.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.